This is the base of a huge flower smuggling organization, and the boss is Denny from the racing gang. This is our bald old man. A long-haired undercover officer had been quietly infiltrating Denny's gang for 5 years, waiting for the day to strike. Finally, that fateful day arrived. Just as Denny was urging his employees to prepare the flour, the police suddenly appeared and surrounded the place. After cutting the power, they quickly stormed into the warehouse and initiated the arrests. The ones outside were ambushed and had no choice but to surrender. The guys inside the warehouse fought fiercely, but during the struggle, one of them was taken down by the bald old man. At that moment, the gang realized in shock that the bald old man was actually a police officer. With no way out, Denny escaped with his son in a car. The bald old man chased after them on his motorcycle, and the streets had now turned into a racetrack. He cooperated with the police and finally succeeded in the arrest of Denny. However, Denny's son was a violent man. He desperately resisted, but as a result, he was taken down by the police on the spot. The death of his son was a heavy blow to Denny. In his suffering, he vowed to make the bald man pay for it, waiting for the era of one boss to officially come to an end. The bald man, after living a dangerous life for many years, finally decided to step back. He intended to return to his hometown to raise fish and cultivate vegetables. 2 years after leaving the underworld, the bald man moved to a quiet little town in Louisiana, living a discreet life. However, life does not go as dreamily as one would hope. A year ago, his wife passed away from a serious illness, leaving behind their 8-year-old daughter Maddie. Life is not very abundant, but the father and daughter make an effort to spend each day happily and joyfully. However, one day, a bad thing happened where Maddie was bullied by a fat boy at school. He snatched Maddie's hat, but she remembered her father's words, which told her not to fight with others, so she demanded the fat boy return her hat. However, he did not return the hat and pushed her down. She got heated and kicked him, causing the fat boy to bleed from his nose. After this clash, Maddie's name quickly became famous. After a while, the school called the parents, and the bald man also attended. At that time, the fat boy's family arrived. His mother, Kathy, went wild with anger upon seeing her son's face all messed up. She tried to attack the bald man, but fortunately, the teacher stopped her. At this point, the bald man explained to the teacher that Maddie's actions were completely self-defense. He also shared that his wife had passed away a year ago. As a result, the girl's mental state deteriorated, and he taught Maddie the basics of misdiagnosis techniques to become stronger. After hearing this, the teacher understood the problem. Furthermore, the overweight boy was skilled at bullying other students, so considering Maddie's actions, he wasn't wrong. After the interaction with the teacher, the bald old man and his daughter arrived at Kilo, but just outside the school gate, they encountered Kathy and her husband again. Despite the clear explanation, they ignored it. Kathy was excited and told her husband how to regain his position against the bald old man for their son's sake. However, before he could touch his stomach, the bald old man retaliated and pushed him to the ground. All the teachers witnessed the scene, and it felt like a slap to the honor of Kathy's family. While everyone was discussing, the bald old man quietly took his daughter home, which reduced one problem for him. However, the eyes of the woman with the sour expression were filled with hatred. After seeing her son get beaten and her husband get hurt, she vowed never to let the bald old man feel relieved. That night, Kathy decided to ask her real brother for help. He is Gator, a so-called real gangster. Thanks to such a prominent brother, Kathy was called the beauty of the neighborhood, no matter how overweight she was. At her brother's base, Kathy recounted all the events. Did you know that my brother was attacked by someone this morning? He got beaten up and lost face. Gator didn't show much interest upon hearing that. You see, your brother makes hundreds of dollars every minute, so he doesn't have time to worry about such small things. At that time, selling flour to make money is a better option. Gator tried to ignore the matter, but Kathy refused to do so. She began to cry, and ultimately Gator reluctantly agreed to help for her sake. He immediately ordered 2 of his trusted subordinates to teach the bald man a lesson. The next morning, the bald man took Maddie to school as usual. However, the moment he stepped through the gate, the teacher mentioned the fat man's family issues to him. He talked about how his father had just finished his examination and the doctor said the injury was about 10%. Hearing that, the bald man felt a bit awkward as well. He had indeed gone too far. Furthermore, he didn't want to raise his daughter in a violent environment. His dream was to have a peaceful life. Not wanting to blow the small issue out of proportion, he decided to meet with the fat man's father. He said that Maddie's behavior was self-defense but was a bit excessive. and he didn't wish for things to escalate this far. If you need any help, just call my name. I will be happy to help you. The bald man's sincere and straightforward attitude made the overweight man's father feel respect. After thinking for a while, he accepted the bald man's apology. On his way home, the bald man stopped at a roadside gas station. However, while he was refueling, a red car approached and stopped right behind him. Through the side mirror, he saw two gang members get out of the car. These two looked very violent, and he definitely did not want to get involved. However, one of them deliberately stood in front of him and threw out rude words. Moreover, they even mocked him by bringing up his personality. Unable to endure this, the bald man retaliated and knocked him down on the spot. The remaining man tried to help, but in an instant, he was struck and could not lift his head. The boss watched this scene and opened his mouth in shock. He didn't think the bald old man had such skills. The bald old man simply replied, "It's not a big deal. Once he transports them to the virtual arena later, it's over." Saying that, he got into his car and left, as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, as Gator was in the room mixing flour, the phone rang. On the other end, there was one of the two who had been taken down by the bald old man. Hearing that two of his subordinates had been taken out, Gator's face turned pale with rage. It really is a waste to support you guys. This time, Gator intends to step out himself and show Baldy the true power of a gang. That afternoon, Baldy went to pick up Marie and took her to ride horses at the neighboring farm. However, while the father and daughter were relaxing, Gator was quietly creeping up to their house. He first slashed Baldy's tires, then infiltrated the interior. Then, after grabbing a stuffed animal, he thoroughly searched each room. Finally, Gator found a door leading to the basement. There, he discovered an old cabinet and found a bundle of documents inside. He was shocked to see the cover labeled Undercover Officer Baldy, but before he had a chance to regain his composure, he heard the sound of hooves outside. Realizing that time was running out, he stuffed the documents inside himself and retreated. However, before leaving, he also captured Maddie's king as a warning. That night, as usual, Maddie brought food for the king, but he couldn't be found no matter how many times she called. She searched all the usual corners, but he was still nowhere to be found. The bald man saw this and began searching to help his daughter. However, as soon as he stepped out the door, he realized that the tire of his motorcycle was flat. Seeing such a deep and sharp puncture mark, he was sure it wasn't his doing, and he was convinced that someone had caused the trouble. He immediately began to survey the surroundings and discovered Maddie's stuffed toy discarded in the forest, but the king was nowhere to be seen. At this moment, the bald man was convinced that this was a warning, and the first name that came to mind was none other than Kathy's family. The next morning, the bald old man didn't wander around like a lost puppy and headed straight to Kathy's house. He demanded that she return the king for her. Human endurance has its limits, you know. Kathy's husband heard this and was completely confused, not understanding at all. Hello? I don't know anything. Meanwhile, over there, Gator turned pale after seeing the bald old man's file. This was because the undercover officer was the one who had once destroyed the base of the notorious racing gang led by Denny. This is bad. At this moment, Gator realized he had crossed paths with the wrong person. He didn't want to be involved in this, so he contacted his ex-girlfriend, Celine. Ata was a former member of the racing gang, but he was different from Denny. Ata had only participated in the races and was not involved in the powder trade, allowing him to evade the investigation from a few years ago. Gator wanted Celine to deliver this document to Denny to gain a business opportunity. Denny is a big player in the wheat industry with numerous connections from Asia to Europe. He believed that reigniting an old grudge through this file would allow him to expand his wheat smuggling routes. Later, Mary handed the file to Danny's lawyer. Soon after, the file was in the boss's hands. Despite spending years in prison, Danny had never forgotten a single day about his son's revenge. When he received the file, he looked at the bald old man's face and burst out laughing. Without hesitation, he immediately ordered 500 of his men to deal with the bald old man. Meanwhile, the bald old man was taking his daughter to school every morning. Every day, he ran into a fat man at the school gate. Although there was no longer any conflict between the two, it was clear that an invisible wall existed. To fundamentally resolve all conflicts, the bald old man told Maddie to invite the fat guy to a birthday party. And he never imagined that such a small gesture would move Kathy's heart. Upon learning that her son was invited, she quietly nodded and no longer spoke harshly like before. Everything seemed to be getting a little better, but no one noticed. Meanwhile, Gator was secretly planning to attack the bald old man. That afternoon, a kind neighbor came to visit the bald old man's house. During the conversation, he pointed out that Kathy has a very dangerous gang brother. If you do anything inappropriate to her, you should be a little cautious. Hearing this, the bald old man thanked his friend and began to stay alert in his mind. So that night, he contacted his former boss to gather information about Kathy's brother. In fact, he was Gator. From what I saw, I thought he was just a small flower merchant, so I thought there was no need to worry. However, when my boss mentioned that his ex-girlfriend was once a member of a racing gang, things changed. Now she is closely involved with Gator. Upon hearing that, the bald old man immediately changed his expression. He realized that the identity of his undercover agent was highly likely to be exposed. The next day, as the bald old man passed by the bar, he happened to see Gator sitting in midair. Without hesitation, the bald old man walked straight in and confronted him. "Did you damage my tire?" However, Gator replied that he didn't know. The bald old man was extremely angry upon hearing that. "Stay out of my sight, and then you can sleep peacefully." However, when the bald old man looked at the face of the woman sitting next to him, he felt a sense of familiarity. After leaving the shop, he immediately opened his phone to search for information, and as expected, he found it. She is Celine, his ex-girlfriend and a trusted subordinate of Denny. He knew the situation was serious and that it could affect Maddie's safety. The bald old man, with years of experience as an investigator, headed straight for Gator's flower processing plant. Once inside, it resembled a small factory equipped with full facilities and machinery. He opened the refrigerator and found neatly stacked flour inside. To teach Gator what a festival is, the bald old man decided to destroy this place completely. He removed the light bulb and poured gasoline inside. Then, he evenly poured it over the entire floor and into every corner. Once the electricity turned on, there was no doubt this place would be engulfed in flames instantly. After setting the stage, just as he was about to leave, he found his daughter's precious king. However, before he could celebrate, a gun was pressed against the back of his head. Acting on his instincts as an undercover agent, the bald old man calmly turned around, snatched the enemy's gun, and knocked him to the floor. But just after that, he was struck from behind and lost consciousness on the spot. When he woke up, the bald old man realized he was tied up. In front of him were familiar faces that he had tormented at the gas station. The one who hits the hardest is Tony. He was babbling as he hit, but his biggest mistake was touching the bald old man's daughter. Immediately, he thrust his head forward and kicked him. While he was pretending to be restrained, he continued to untie the ropes and push the man who rushed in down. The third one was suddenly knocked out before he could draw his sword. After dealing with these guys, the bald old man left this place. Danny finally started to take action as well. He dispatched a very formidable group of assassins and turned their leader into a celestial being. At that moment, the assassins came looking for Gator. He thought they had come to negotiate a deal to expand the drug trade, but that wasn't the case. They didn't mention the deal at all. Instead, they demanded to be taken to the bald old man's house. Hearing that, Gator felt fed up. He originally wanted to threaten the bald old man, but refused to participate because he didn't want bloodshed. However, seeing this number of people, Gator became terrified. Fortunately, the heavenly being assured him that he only needed to show the way, and didn't have to intervene. Hearing that, Gator reluctantly agreed. At that moment, the bald old man returned home with the king. Nincom felt an ominous sense and began to pack his things to leave this place with his daughter that night. However, he was unaware that the assassins of Boss Danny were coming here. They arrived by boat from the river behind the house without using the road. However, as they approached the house, they noticed a neighbor feeding a horse. And they had no choice but to send 6 or 7 men to capture the bald old man. As one man with a gun entered and searched the stable, the bald old man jumped in and blew the weapon away. The moment he tried to pick up the gun, the bald old man took him down with a wooden nail right there. After that, Kito quickly got into the car and honked the horn repeatedly to send a warning signal to the bald old man. However, the sound of the horn was noticed by the assassins, and they quickly moved to deal with the bald old man. Inside the house, when the bald old man heard the sound of the car, he immediately sprang into action. He turned off all the lights, took Maddie to the storage room, and instructed her to call the police. Then, he returned to the bedroom and took out the box he had hidden under the bed for 2 years. Inside were the handguns he had fought with through many battles. Outside, the assassins also noticed that the lights inside the house were off. Clearly, the enemy knew they had come here. At this moment, the assassins were no longer hiding and launched their attack all at once. The first two stepped forward and took 2 shots right there. However, the gunshot frightened Maddie, and she screamed. The assassin heard her voice and chased after her. However, he had no intention of attacking. He aimed to capture Maddie and draw out the old baldy. The old baldy at the venue also realized that Maddie had been found. He quickly dealt with the assassins and hurried to chase after her. In the forest, the assassin was getting anxious as Maddie was too fast. He continued to chase her, but just when he had no chance to shoot, the old baldy appeared to rescue her with 2 gunshots. The gunshots echoed, and Maddie panicked and ran into the forest. The old baldy quickly chased after her but was blocked by another assassin. However, while the two were fighting, Maddie was ambushed and captured in her panic. He quickly covered her mouth and pulled her onto the boat to escape. By the time the old baldy dealt with the hitman, there was nothing left. At this time, the police finally arrived. They gather when there's food and flee when there's an attack. Fortunately, she was transported to the hospital without serious injuries. And the bald man took a radio out of the police car and waited for a call from his daughter. At this time, Maddie was in a panic on the boat, but she managed to stay calm and took out the phone she had hidden in her pocket to call the police. Remembering her father's instructions, she described the place where Asselin took her. Hearing that, the bald man did not hesitate. He headed to Gator's hideout without the help of the police, stealing their car. After a while, Asselin took Maddie to Gator's hideout. The moment he saw the girl, he was shaken. The sister was unconscious. I only exchanged information for business and don't want to get involved in this. She didn't understand who he was, yet she made a move on his daughter. Touching that girl is like destroying oneself. Finally, she found herself in a situation where she could neither fight nor run away. Now the only way is to dispose of that girl. After that, hiding the body so that no one would testify would complete the task. However, just at that moment, Kathy's family appeared here. Kathy said she heard that the baldy's daughter was missing and asked not to mention that she was here. Gator couldn't say anything upon hearing those words. He couldn't argue because it was too true. At that moment, a voice from the inner room called for Maddie's help. Kathy was very surprised to hear those words. She quickly turned on the light to check but accidentally triggered the baldy's trap. And then, boom. The flower nest that Gator had taken 15 seconds to create disappeared instantly. Staring into the flames in Gator's mind, his thoughts focused solely on the bald old man's daughter. If he handed her over to Denny, he would not only get revenge but also receive help for his career again. However, the one to blame was Kathy. She hadn't allowed Gator to take Maddie. Yet in the midst of the commotion, Gator accidentally pushed Kathy down. She was the only close person by his side, but now she was gone. At that moment, Gator lost all will and quickly left with Maddie. At the same time, the bald old man arrived on the scene. Seeing Gator escape, he immediately jumped in his car and chased after him. The two ran with astounding speed and arrived at a large bridge. The police quickly activated the system to detach the bridge, preventing Gator's escape. However, just a second before the bridge was detached, he desperately stepped forward and jumped to the other side. The bald old man saw this and chased after him, but unfortunately crashed into a barricade. The car spun several times on the road and ultimately flipped over. Since the bridge was completely detached, the police could only feel powerless from this side. At this point, the fight was left to just the two men. Gator realized there was no escape route and decided to end everything. Maddie pleaded with him from behind to forgive her father, but Gator replied that it was impossible. But the moment he turned around, the bald old man suddenly jumped out and attacked. He overpowered his gun and knocked him to the ground. With each blow, he struck as if to unleash the hatred he had suppressed for a long time. Seeing that Gator could no longer stand, he finally picked up the gun and prepared to end everything right there. But just before pulling the trigger, he saw the terrified eyes of his daughter, a trembling, pleading gaze of a child afraid of losing her father. Ultimately, the bald old man decided to put down the gun, let go of his hatred, and embrace his daughter. At that moment, the police finally crossed the bridge, arrived at the scene, arrested Gator, and Kathy was quickly taken to the hospital. 2 days later, reports came in that someone was visiting him at the detention center. Denny thought it was an assassin coming to report on the mission, but he was surprised to find it was the bald old man. In the eyes of the racing gang and Denny, the bald old man would appear as a traitor, a thorn that needed to be removed. However, for him, losing was the same as losing the entire world. He sacrificed all his fame and connections to protect his daughter. The old man, having finished everything, stared into Danny's eyes and said to come out. Grandpa, if you come, I'll just go pick you up. And then the movie will end here. If you find it interesting, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button so you don't miss out on captivating movies.